Okay, so first I want to clarify some points in the third project. For question one, for the first problem, so here, what I mean in this sentence is that because for some nodes, they may have the same average length, right? So for such cases, please sort the nodes with the same average length by their IDs in ascending order. But remember that please sort treat the IDs as a number, not as a string, and then sort them in ascending order. So that's a objective of this problem. You can see the sample output provided in WebSam 3. Again, so there may be some precision problems. So you don't need to worry about that. It will be treated correct. So if you find slightly different from your result, if your results are slightly different from the result provided, just because of precision problem, then you will not lose any marks. So that's for the first problem. And for the second problem, please use GraphX Prego operator to do this. I'm not sure if you are able to solve the problem provided in the second lab, in this week's lab. I know that GraphX is not it's a new topic, and Prego is also a new topic. You may not be, you're not very familiar with this new concept. So for this problem, I can give you some hint. The idea is that, so it's very similar to the shortest path problem, but the messages you send and receive are different from the problem in the shortest path problem. So here, what you need to do is that to track to you can set a status for each node, either reachable or unreachable. You can use true or false or 1 or 0. Okay, it doesn't matter. So initially, the source node 0, it is reachable from itself, right? So you can set the status on the source node as true, means reachable. And then you just need to, each round, you just need to follow the outgoing edges to spread out this message to its neighbors. Okay, so the message is like from this source node, it's true, and then you just need to send this true to his neighbors. And if his neighbor is false, and then you know, now actually you active his neighbor. So his neighbor's status is also true, which means it's also reachable from the source node. So you can just need to do this in an iterative way. So after several rounds of iterations, so the nodes that are reachable to the source node will have status true, and other nodes will have status false. So by doing this, you can get a graph with some status on the nodes. Then you just need to count the number of the nodes with status true, and then -1 because the source node is not counted in the result. So that's a basic idea. So the key challenge here is that how you can define three functions. What is receiving message function? How to define the merging message function? How to define the send up process? How to define the function for send out messages? So that's a key challenge. I already gave you the idea, so you can try to utilize this idea to solve this problem. Hopefully, this can help you, just in case you do not have any clue for this problem. Okay, so that's for the third project. Another issue with project is that we find some similar submissions in project 2. Actually, there are also some situations in project 1, but because it's a very similar project, so it's hard to say if you have copied or just do it by yourself, because if you use similar ideas, the codes will be very similar. So it's very hard to say to detect the similar projects in similar submissions in project 1. But in project 2, it's because the code structure is very complicated, and now it's much easier to find the similar submissions. I can see that someone actually just copied directly from another one's submission. So there are more than 100 submissions, so it's hard to detect all the similar ones. So actually, that's what we will learn in today's lecture: how to detect similar pairs in a given document, in large given documents. We will see how we can do that in for a given large data set. But for us, we it's not possible to. It's kind of a waste of the tutor's time because they also have some work to do. So I can only just ask them to do some very simple checking for submissions. Anyway, so we still detect some similar submissions, and there will be some punishment. But I still hope that you can either send me emails to explain, or if you have done something like this. It's okay, as I said before, actually, in the first lecture, I've said it's okay to discuss ideas. It's totally fine. Or if someone asks you, I don't know how to do it, you can give me some hints. You can discuss about this. But at least you need to implement your algorithm. You need to write code, right? You cannot just copy the codes from other students. That's not acceptable. And if you did such things, and okay, so if you believe that you are very smart and we are not able to detect, it's okay. You can just keep silent. You can just keep silent. But if you do not tell me, but we detect this kind of behavior, then the punishment will be much how to say. Okay. Anyway, so I hope you can also tell your classmates about this problem. And also in project 3, this week is a submission. I hope that you can do the project on your own. For these two problems, actually the length of the code is not very long. You just need to write several lines to finish two problems. So again, it's not easy to say if the two submissions are similar or not, because all structures of code are very similar. But what I would say is that the problems aim to help you to understand the topics you have learned in the course, okay? So you have paid a lot of money to learn in the university, to take this course. I just hope that you don't want to waste your money. At least you should learn something. Maybe you are not interested in computer science, or you are not interested in this project, in this course, but things you have already made the decision to take this course. I just hope that you can work hard, at least work on your own for this course. Okay, you need to be responsible for yourself. So let's begin the lecture today. So the previous plan is that we will first learn streaming data processing and then move to this topic. But because last project is relevant to the knowledge we will learn in this chapter, so I move it prior to the streaming data processing. So this week, by this weekend, the last project will be released, and you will do the project based on AWS. And you are given 3 weeks for this project because it's kind of a little bit complicated. You need to spend some time on debugging in AWS, which will cost you some time. And so anyway, so if you feel that 3 weeks is not enough, I can still consider to extend the submission deadline. So we can discuss that later. Okay, so let's begin today's topic. You can see the topic, finding similar items, right? I'll try to apply this in the similar project submission detection. But this is not exact solution for today's topic. It's based on locality system hashing. The reason is because normally we are given a huge data set. There are a lot of records in the data set. So if you want to do pairwise similar computation, which means the complexity is n squared, and given a large n, this is not possible. You may take maybe several days or even months to finish this job. And in order to reduce the complexity, so LSH, the locality system hashing, is very useful for us to use, which has a complexity of linear complexity. Just O(n) time, you can find most of the similar items, because this is not exact solution, it's a kind of approximate solution. But it has some kind of probability guarantees for you to use. And so many problems can be expressed as finding similar sets or similar pairs. For example, in high dimensional space, we can find the nearest neighbor for a given object. So this is called a similar pair because they are very close to each other, and their distance is very small, and their similarity is very high. So for documents, well, this kind of to find similar documents and can be used to for classification or for duplicate detection, and can also be used to find similar customers with similar purchase histories. So which means that the users have similar interests or similar tastes. So we can do some kind of recommendation based on this, and also image detection can also be one of this problem. Image can be expressed by features, so it's also a high dimension data. So one image can be represented by vector with several dimensions, and then we can use this vector to compute similar images. For example, in Google's image search, so we can submit an image to Google, and then from the massive amounts of the images, so what we want to get is to find some similar images. So some candidates will be returned to you. So from this, you can try to check, okay, which one is the most similar to a given query. And so you can see the challenge here is that first is about the biggest challenge actually is about data size, because there are so many images in the database, and if you want to try to check to compute similarity of each one with a given query image, and it will take very long time. You will not be able to receive the response, receive the results in an instant manner. So which means you need to wait for a very long time. And okay, there are also some other challenges, especially for images, because it's not very easy to express an image as mathematical, some kind of math representations we can use. It's not very easy to use some mathematical representations to express images. But that's not the focus of our lecture today. What we focus is about how to deal with data size, how to find similar items from huge given data sets. The problem here is like this. So giving you the high definition data points, x1, x2, and x2 until to xn, such as image, and it can be treated as a long vector of pixel colors. So, also documents. So for documents, and each dimension each keyword can be treated as one dimension. So document can be represented as a vector as well. So many real-world objects can be represented by the high-dimensional vectors. And then we can define some distance function over the high-dimensional data. Distance function d is used to quantify the distance between x1 and x2. And distance is also kind of relevant to similarity. So if two objects are similar to each other, it means their distance is very small. And if the two objects have very large distance, so their similarity is also not quite good. And so given the data setting, the goal is to find all pairs of data points that are within some distance threshold. In this given threshold, similarity threshold, we want to detect all the similar pairs. So for example, for your given submission, so we can use a vector to express the codes. We can extract some features, and then based on this vector, so we can tune the distance threshold to find all the similar submissions, and then we do a manual check to see if it is if there is some plagiarism issues in the two submissions. So the setting is like this. A very straightforward method is to compute the similarities for each pair, right? So the complexity is O(n) squared. It's it's not quite large compared to NP problems. For NP problems, the complexity normally is not polynomial time; it's exponential time. But for big data problems, n squared is not good because n is normally very huge, and n times n normally would make the problem infeasible, especially for the query problem. For query problems, what we wish is to get some result at least within several seconds. But for such an algorithm, it may take several days. And what we learned is that instead of doing this using an n squared complexity algorithm, we can do this in own time, but we have some loss of the accuracy. We cannot find exact we cannot find exact solutions at this algorithm. This can find all the pairs whose distance is smaller than this threshold. But for the algorithm we learned today, we can find most such pairs, but we'll miss some pairs. Okay, and how this can be achieved? So that's a major objective of today's lecture. For distance measure, so for high-dimensional data, Jacob similarity or Jacob distance is one of the most popular, most widely used measure to evaluate the distance and similarity between two high-dimensional data points. And so we can, this Jacob similarity or Jacob distance is originally defined for the sets. And given two sets, and the Jacob similarity is defined as the intersection of the two sets divided by the union of the two sets. So this is a Jacob similarity. And Jacob distance is just 1 minus the Jacob similarity, Jacob distance. Sorry, this is the distance, and this is the similarity. So using an example, so we can see if there are two sets, so one is enclosed by this circle, and this another one is enclosed by this circle. So this one has 6 points, this one has 5 points, and they have 3 points in common, and together they cover 8 points. So the intersection is 3 and the union is 8. So as a result, according to definition, the Jacob similarity is 3 divided by 8, and the Jacob distance is 1 minus the similarity is 5 divided by 8. And in the last project, you will utilize this Jacob similarity or Jacob distance to do some similar pair detection tasks. Okay, and so it's very important for you to understand how to compute the Jacob similarity and Jacob distance. Well, it is actually it's very straightforward to compute the ratio of the common part and in all the objects they covered. And okay, so now given the problem for a huge number of documents, so how to find the near duplicate pairs, how to detect all the similar documents in the given data set. So that's a task. And this can be used in many applications, such as we can use to detect the mirror websites. So for example, in Google search, and if giving you some results, okay, so although they are similar to your search keywords, but they may be similar to each other, right? Also for news, we want to know some news, and the return news may be relevant to your result, to your search, but this news may be similar to each other. So actually, they kind of telling you the same story, right? But you wish to receive more information. So how to avoid this? So we can try to use this. We can detect the near duplicate documents, and then to distinguish them, we can try to diversify the results instead of returning the similar documents in the results returned to you. And so the problem and the challenges in such a task is that first, there are many small pieces of one document can appear out of order in another, right? So consider the paragraphs, and the paragraphs maybe in this document is of this order, but in another document it may be in different orders. And the because it is a very large data set, so there are too many documents to compare. So it's not possible to compare all the pairs as I said before, because the complexity is n squared, which is too high. And also another problem is that the documents may also itself, it may also be very large. And then you are not possible to load a single document into memory. And if you cannot do this, then it's definitely you are not possible to compute the similarity between two documents, right? So given these challenges, how we can still be able to solve this problem? And today we will learn three methods for this task. The first is called shingling. And shingling is used to solve the large document problem. So giving you a large document, now we try to, So for large document problems solved in the second technique. Okay, so first one is how to represent the documents. So the documents informative of actually it's informative of set of keywords, right? It's just a set of keywords. And how to represent the documents is our first problem. We first need to define the documents as high-dimensional data points, and then we can apply the algorithms for this task. So the first step is to convert documents to sets. And this first technique called shingling, so we'll see the details later. And after we have converted the document to sets, it is still possible that the elements in this set is too many, right? So we are not able to load such a huge set into memory for similarity computation. So the second step is to convert the large sets to short signatures. So we reduce the number of elements in the set, but we can still preserve the similarity. So we may lose some accuracy, but we preserve most of the similarity between any pair of the documents or any pair of the sets, because we already convert documents to sets. So that's the second technique called mean hashing. And so now we guarantee that all the documents can be represented by a fixed size representation. So we can load every document into memory. So that's our second problem. But last one is also the most important one, is that how we can avoid the pairwise similarity computation. If you compare the similarity for all pairs, it means that the complexity is very high, right? So in order to avoid this, we apply the locality sensitive hashing to focus on pairs of signatures likely to be from similar documents. So from the name, you can see that we use hashing technique. And actually, we will hash some similar documents to same buckets. And then we will only compute the documents, the similarities for documents within one bucket. So this can help us to filter a lot of results that are likely to be similar. Which means that actually, so here we only focus on the candidate pairs. So we only do the similarity computation for candidate pairs. And by using this technique, we reduce the complexity from n squared to O(n) to linear time. So that's where the major magic happens. And so next, I'll introduce each technique one by one. So the big picture is like this. So given you a large number of documents, so what we will do is first is do the shingling. And we will represent the documents by sets. And the set of strings of length k will be computed for each document. So each element in this set is a string containing k words, k terms. And then for each document, we will compute all such k term strings. So as a result, the document will be represented by a set of the k terms strings. So that's for shingling. So the detail will be shown later. And next is based on this set representation for documents and how we can compute the short signatures. It's called mean hashing. And we will use short integer vectors to represent the sets. And because the number of elements in the sets are reduced significantly, right? But by applying this technique, we are still able to preserve the similarity. So which means that if the two documents are similar according to the set representation, they're also similar based on this short signature, so that's for me-hashing. And next, based on this hashing technique, the results obtained from the me-hashing technique, we apply this locality-sensitive hashing to do the similarity checking for only the connected pairs. And after the 3 steps, so finally we will find most similar pairs in the given data set. So that's the big picture. So remember that shingling, me-hashing, and locality-sensitive hashing. So it's step by step. Okay, so the first step is called shingling. It's about how we can use set to represent the documents. So the set representation for documents. So a document is just a set of words, right? So we can use some simple approaches. So we can just use a set of words appearing in this document. Now, in this set, each element is one term in this document. But the problem is that some words, actually, they are not useful in the search. For example, if you have learned information retrieval, you should know there's something called stop words, such as is, are, some words like this, or some. These words are not useful for the similarity computation. So we can only use kind of important words. We can remove these stop words and only keep the important words for the set representation of the documents. But it does not work very good for this application if the single word representation. And so you can think about the reason behind. And we need to account for the reason actually is just because the order of the words should be considered. If you only use a single term for the set representation of a document, which means that you lose the order of the terms in the documents, right? Now, so each element in the set is just one word, which means that all the orders of these words in the document are totally lost in this set. So in order to capture the order, and the technique is called the the shingling. So we compute the shingles for the document. So definition is like this. It's called K-shingle. In information retrieval, it's normally called the K-gram. And for each document, we use a sequence of K tokens that appears in the document to represent this document. And the tokens can be characters or words or something else, but normally we use characters or words. And it depends on the application scenario. And so let's look at one example. So assume that we use characters as a token, but the words can also be used as a token. So assume we use characters as a token. And now we are given a document D, which contains A, B, C, A, B, and K is equal to 2, which means that each shingle contains 2 characters. So the result will be, we can find all the possible 2 shingles in this document is AB, BC, CA, AB. But this AB and this AB is the same. So we only keep a set for the shingles. And so the result is AB, BC, and CA. So that's all the K tokens appearing in this document, right? So AB, BC, CA, AB. So using 2 shingles, we can preserve some order information. So only the 2 words order are preserved in the set representation, right? But if you only use A, B, C, A, you only use A, B, C. So if there's one shingle, if you only use one shingle, so the set will be A, B, C. And you can see that you have no order information for the characters in this document. And so normally we use a set to represent documents, but sometimes we can also use a multi-set to represent documents. So which means we can count the same shingle for multiple times. So for example, in this example, because this representation can also capture the frequency information. So if one shingle appears too many times, then it will be too many times in documents, then it can be reflected in this multi-set representation. But the frequency information will be lost in this set representation. And again, it depends on the application scenarios. You can choose which one to use according to your application. So this is just one example of the shingles, how we can convert the documents to a set of K shingles. And if there are any questions about this concept, it should be very easy to understand, right? Because that's called shingles. And now, given this concept of shingles, we are able to convert documents to a set of shingles, right? And in the set, each element is a K shingle, which appears in this document. And the idea is that if two documents are similar to each other, and they should have many shingles in common. So that's why we believe that the set of shingles representation can be used to compute the similarity of two documents. Because if there are too many common shingles in two sets, and the two documents should be similar to each other. So that's the idea. Changing one word in a document actually only affects K shingles within distance K minus 1 from the word. So we can see this example. We can see an example later. And reordering the paragraphs only affects the 2K shingles that across paragraph boundaries. And these are just because of the definition of the K shingles. So we can think about why the value is K minus 1, why it is 2K. But these two points just aim to tell you that slightly change of existing document also leads to slightly change in the set representation for the document. So as a result, we can say that two similar documents should have many common shingles in the set representation. So given this document, the dog which chased the cat and the dog that chased the cat, only one term is different in the two sentences, right? And now only 3 shingles are replaced from this sentence to this sentence, which if we also consider the space, so it will be G space W replaced by G space T, and then space WH, WI, HIC, SH space, and only an H space C. So only these 3 shingles will be replaced by here by the some 3 shingles computed from that term. But we can see that in this sentence, in this long sentence, if we treat characters as a token, and the number of 3 shingles is much larger than the number of 3 shingles here, right? So we can see one word change in the sentence only cause a few shingles change in the set representation. So that's the relationships between shingles and the similarity of the documents. And it's possible that some shingles is very long. So for example, if we use words as tokens, not characters as tokens, then one word is a token, then which means that your shingle contains K terms. So this may be too long. And as a result, we can hash them to several bytes, say 4 bytes. So we can represent a document by the set of hash values of the always K shingles. And so for example, still consider the documents D1 and K equals to 2. D1 is A, B, C, A, B. And the set of 2 shingles is A, B, B, C, and C, A. And we can hash the K shingles to some integers as a result, it's possible that then we can use 157 to represent the k shingles. So it is much more succinct in this representation. The idea of this representation is that if two documents, if they rarely appear to have shingles in common, then in fact only the hash values were shared. So it also, we can use the hash values also because of this the document's representation. And so that's about how you can compress the long shingles for shorter presentation. Then this can help you to improve the efficiency for the next step computation. And so anyway, so you just need to remember that given a document and the value k, and characters or words can both be used as tokens, how we can get the k shingles for the given document. Okay, so now the documents are represented by set, right? So we can apply the Jacob similarity or Jacob distance to compute similarity between the two documents, because now they are already sets representations. So document D1 now is a set of the k shingles, C1, which is SD1, a set of the k shingles. Now, each document is a 0, 1 vector in the space of k shingles. So each k shingle can be treated as one dimension in the dimensional space. Each unique shingle is a dimension now. And so in this representations, each document is a vector. And 0 means that this k shingle is not contained in this document. And 1 means this k shingle appears in this document. So it's a 0, 1 representation of a vector in the k shingle high dimensional space. But this vector would be very, very sparse because each document only contains a few portion of all the k shingles in the whole document. And now we can use Jacob similarity to compute the similarity of two documents. So given D1 and D2, their similarity can be computed by, first we use the k shingle set to represent each document, C1, C2, and then we compute the number of common k shingles divided by the number of all the k shingles in the two documents. Then the similarity can be computed. And the Jacob distance is just 1 minus this similarity. So for example here, given two documents, assume that one document is mapped to a 6 k shingle vector, and another one is also mapped to a 6 k shingle vector. They have 4 k shingles in common. So the similarity is 4 divided by 8, which is 0.5. So it's a similarity for the two documents. So the documents that have lots of shingles in common normally will have similar text, even if the text appears in some different orders. And so if we pick k, if k is too small, then we would expect most sequence of k characters will appear in most documents, right? So in the extreme case, if we set k to 1, so each document, it just represents as a 26 characters set, right? So because k is 1, so each k shingle, one shingle is just a character itself. So which means that all the documents will have the same set representation with just 26 characters in this document. And if you do this, which means that you are not able to find similar documents because all of them have the same representation, right? So if k is too small, which means that the sequence of the k characters would appear in many documents, and many documents would be treated as similar in this case, in this small k case. And so, which means that we must select appropriate value for k in the applications. So if k is too large, there is also a problem, because if k is too large, which means that the k shingle will have too many number of k shingles, because it's assume that k is 1,000, and then in each document you need to get all the 1,000 k shingles. and which means that many documents would not have common caching goals. And as a result, you are also not be able to detect similar documents because all the documents will be treated not similar. So that's two extreme cases. So K cannot be too large, can also not be too small, right? So normally, how to select a proper value for K, and it depends on your data set. So if it's for short documents, normally we set K to around the range of 5, so maybe from 4 to 6. And if it is long documents, so we can set K a little bit larger. We set K to a value around value 10. So this is based on some experiments. There's not some theoretical analysis, but just based on some heuristic experiments. So now, after selecting a proper value for K, so we are able to represent documents by the caching goal sets. Okay, so that's our first step, caching goals. How to compute caching goals for a given document and how to set value K is a key challenge, as key challenges in this step to represent documents as sets. Now, next is about how we can try to reduce the size of the set representation for each document. Because given a large document and also given a large data set, so the number of terms will be very huge, right? And as a result, number of caching goals would also be very, very large. And given a document, if this document is too large, then it is also possible that the set representation of this document is very large and it's not able to be loaded into memory, right? So that's a problem. And another thing is that, so that's one problem. Another problem is that the pairwise computation is too slow. So this example gives you some results, some data for you to understand this problem. So for example, if you compute the pairwise Jacob similarity for every pairs of documents, and then the number of comparisons is n times n minus 1 divided by 2, right? So if you are given 1 million documents, 1 million documents actually is not too large. It's still not a large data set. Remember, think about the number of blogs, the number of news published every day in the internet, right? So 1 million is not a big number. And so given you 1 million documents, if you do this pairwise Jacob similarity computation, so you need to do so many comparisons and assume that for each second, you can do so many comparisons that normally maybe you are not able to achieve this number. So anyway, so it's still just estimation, and even based on this estimation, this will still take 5 days for you to detect the similar pairs in just 1 million documents, which is not a very large data set, just a moderate size data set. So if there's much larger data set, 10 million, and based on this computation, it may take more than 1 year to find similar documents. So that's why we need the next two steps, mean hash and LSH. So mean hash is used to reduce the size of the set representation for documents. And LSH is to avoid the pairwise Jacob similarity computation. So now let's move to the next step. Okay, before moving to the next step, so if there are any questions about the first step for caching goals, it should be very easy, right? Okay, so we move to the next step, mean hashing. So that's to convert the large sets to short signatures. And remember that we will still preserve similarity. It's easy to cut the large sets to short sets, right? But the difficulty is that how we can still preserve the similarity. So that's a key challenge. And in mean hashing, okay, so the first step is that we need to encode the set as a bit vectors. And so we can just use 0, 1 values to represent the appearance of one element in the set, and then as a result, we can represent the set as vectors. So which means that in this representation, each element in a set is one dimension, and for a set, it's represented by a vector, and in this vector, 0 value means that this element is not contained in this set, and a 1 value means that this element is contained in this set. So each element is one dimension. And now, after this conversion, so now the set is a bit vectors. The sets are bit vectors. Then we can use some bit operators to compute the Jacob similarities, right? So for intersection, it's very easy. So set intersection is now just and for the set union, it's just the OR operator. So now, in order to compute the Jacob similarity for two sets, so we can first convert each set to a bit vector. And for example, for the first document, its set is C1, and then its bit vector representation is 1, 0, 1, 1, 1. And for another document, its bit vector is 1, 0, 0, 1, 1. So it's easy to compute the intersection by using the AND operator, and also easy to compute the union of the two sets by applying the OR operator to the two vectors. So the Jacob similarity is the sets of intersection 3 divided by the sets of union, which is 4. So the similarity is 0.75. And Jacob distance is 1 minus this similarity is 0.25. Okay. And now we can, after we transform the sets to vectors, now we can represent the whole documents, a whole data set as a matrix. Okay. And so each set is one vector. So we put all the sets together. So it is a matrix. So this matrix now is used to represent an original document set. And each row is one element or one K-shingle. So that's one dimension. So it's each row. And each column is one set or one document in the original data set, so which is the meaning of the matrix. The rows are the dimensions, the K-shingles. Each K-shingle is one dimension. And the columns are the documents or the set representation of the documents. And now given you one column, so you are easy to identify the K-shingles in this document, that just to check the 1 values in this column. Okay, so this you can get the K-shingles in the given document for corresponding to this column. And now we can compute the column similarity, just a Jacob similarity of the corresponding sets. Okay, so from the original document dataset, we convert the dataset to a matrix. But this matrix normally is very huge. First, because the number of the K-shingles may be very large, and also the number of documents is also large. So if you times the number of K-shingles and number of documents, so this matrix is extremely huge. And another problem is that this matrix is very, very sparse, because many entries in these documents are zero entries, because one vector is for each document is a sparse vector, because each document only contains a very, very small portion of all the K-shingles, right? So only a few entries are value 1s, but all the other value entries are of value 0. So as a result, the whole matrix is very sparse as well. So this sparse representation is not good for the computations. So given this is one such matrix example. So each column, each row is K-shingles. So this row represents the existence of one K-shingle in each document, and each column is a document. So, for example, take this column as an example. It means that the first, second, third, and the sixth K-shingles are contained in this document. So that's matrix representation. Now, assume that we have the 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 documents, and each document have some elements. So this matrix is can be represented like this. So this each is a K-shingle A, B, C, D, E, and S1, S2, S3, S4 are 4 documents. So based on the given sets, so the matrix representation of the dataset is like this. And then in order to compute the similarity, check a similarity between 2 documents, you just need to take the relevant columns. And then from columns, you get the vectors. And then using the union, using the AND and OR operators, you can get this intersection and union, and you can compute the similarity and the distance, right? For example, S1 and S3, S1 here, S3 here, S1 is AD, so the A and D rows are value of value 1. And for this one, the values, the 1 values appear in the B, D, E rows. And in order to compute the Chekhov similarity, so you first get intersection. Here, only one, in one row, they have both ones. So the set intersection is 1. And for the other rows, only 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, only 4 rows have value 1. So that's a union size. So the similarity is 1 over 4. And so this is about the matrix representation for the given document data set. Okay. Now we still haven't reached the key part of this section. It's about how to use short signatures to represent the documents. And so so far, we have represented documents by sets of K-shingles, and we also represent sets as Boolean vectors in a matrix. So the next step is that we want to find the similar columns, but because columns may be too long, and also because the matrix is very sparse, so we want to use small signatures to replace the columns. So this can help us to do the similarity computations more efficiently, because previously maybe we need to compute similarity based on a very long vector, but now it's only a very short representation. And we also want to preserve the similarity, which means that if we compute the similarity of the 2 signatures, this similarity should reflect the original similarity of the 2 columns, which means that if 2 documents are believed to be similar based on the column representation, and in the signature representation, they should also be treated as similar as well. So that's what is called the similarity preserving. And so that's called the mean hashing technique in this step. Okay, so we can have a short break first, and then after maybe 5 to 10 minutes, we come back.
这就是 edge 它的形式是什么？看这里在 A 吗？不是，应该是 edge，不是啊，我得刚才这个，因为它的形式就是no 打 E 和 AD 有2个 string，然后我这个如果只有一个 string 的话，这就不会有这样。你的 vertex type define 吗？你的 vertex type 有没有 define？ vertex type 就是你的 vertex attribute type 是2个 string， 这个有没有定义出来？我如果是用这种方法的话。这个还是会有问题，还是会有问题。如果去把它扣到，这可能得重新改一下，只能改成 A。 C 已经是一个 RDD 了。啊，不是。这儿的话，这个 vertex 这个 A 是，
这只是一个 temporary，
这个 vertex 还不是一个 RDD 吧？
它上面写的是 RDD non-static。
你现在哪里把它转成 RDD 了？哦，在这儿是吧？这已经是 A 就是 RDD 了对吧？
然后这个是 transform。
如果说你给定出 C，其实就是说你在后面给一堆出来，让它会说一个 mismatch。
但是我这个如果只有一个 string，我这边就不用，就我也不需要这个就是我现在只有一个 A 就好了。
哦，对吧？
它已经有它如果已经是RDD了，你就不需要把它转成。
不需要，
对吧？
对，不用在这儿拉一下，不需要在这儿，你只用 transform 就好，这是 RDD。我也没有看到问题在哪儿。我来试一下，我一看看不到，好的。
老师就是这个第一个 problem， 我打印出来以后就是那个存的文件就多出来一行，一共5242行，这有多一行空行5243行，然后你给的那个
还有。
然后他俩就没有那一行空行最后一行。
这没问题，这
没事儿是吧？
这没关系。
然后我这一 compare 的时候，这边是你原始的那个，然后这边是我自己的，其他都没有问题。
那行，这跟我杨是没关系，这没关系。
然后就是多一行空行，这没事儿。
没事，这个没事，这个不是问题。
这都没有问题。
那可以，
就这儿做的。
OK， 没关系。
然后还有就是那个日志文件，就第二个作业，我直接 print 出来的，就是直接 print 的这一堆里面不是有一个，然后我这儿加了一个主词，就是 result 打印出来，直接在这里就是跟着那个 log 那些东西一起打印出来的，这个应该没事吧？就是我可以给你看一下。
我知道，你不是说直接把那个纸打开了吗？对吧？
就是这样。
没有问题，这个我在那个详细的定一下要怎么做嘛。我其实只想说，只告诉你这个 number， 没有说别的。
3466。然后我这运行以后就是直接会在这里面打印出来。
OK， 应该没什么问题。我再重新再强调一下怎么给好卖的。其实我这只要一个数字，不需要这个 string 什么的。这个 result 也不需要，只要一个数字。
就是这里面直接有一个数字是吗？
因为最后的话，我不是在 Eclipse 里运行的，我是在那个是在那个
terminal
里面运行。然后那个重新向一下的话，然后它那个重新向之后的文件里面只会播放一个数字，它不会看那些 log 没关系的就。
那就是我们还得再重新弄一下这块。
也无所谓，也不用重新弄，就这样其实已经可以了。我只是说你不需要再打一些 string 之类的就。
就是不用打前面这个标，就是标注一下是吗？
也不用，不需要。
我给你看一下啊，就是
跑一下是吧？
对，很快，就是这个那个数是几来着
3466。
对，34664157。没错。就这一堆不都是他跑的过程吗？
这还是用 short distance 算的是吧？
对呀。
这个办法比较取巧，因为有的code跑了一遍。
没有，其实看那个网上找了好多，就是跟你那个写的都差不多，然后就用那种方法可以吗？
其实这不是期待的方式，但是你们都已经做了，我也不好说不行。
对，哎，怎么出来这个东西？
搜一下 result 加冒号应该是出来了。
这儿呢。
对，
4157吗？ 就这样就行了是吧？
可以。
就是不用再给它改成什么格式。
不用。
然后我就把这块去掉就行。
可以。
那个用那个最短路的方法行吗？
我还在想这个问题，我本来是想说最短路的方式的话，你不给满分，然后用那个其他的，因为这个最短路的方式你做了一些额外的不必要的计算嘛，这是我们并不需要把所有的路径和 distance 算出来。
可是好多人都那么
我知道好多人这么做了，所以我在考虑嘛。我要是这么说的话，大家又得换方法去做。那今天我们的思路就是意思就是说，那个是一个更有效的、最有效的方式，它只有有效的手段，没有这些 distance 的计算什么之类的完全不必要的。如果很多人都这么做的话，我现在再改可能有点来不及了。
对了，可是已经1号了吧？
对啊，人这周末就要交嘛。
对啊。
要是再改的话，我怕你们又没时间了。想没有时间算了，所以就做了吧。作业没出好。
谢了。
OK。
那就这个地方，这个数，它就我有时那个这个地方不应该是single，应该是single。
不，这是假设说就是 A 和 D、A、B、C 以及每一个已经代表一个 K symbol 了啊，这是这个意思啊，就说这现在就是说是一个集合，包括了一些元素，然后怎么去用这个矩阵来代表这个集合的集合，是这个意思啊。
那我说，如果在这个就是说在这种 information 如果你要找相似的矩阵的话，最简单不是把它们点成起来？
点成起来？
对，如果两个column 非常相似，点成的话，它们的这个值就会交大。
你是说点击是吧？那个是如果是那个是一分明处理的方式的话，它一般也不是做点击，它是做那个 vector， 是那个 cosine similarity，cosine similarity 下面呢还除了上面点击，下面还要算一个那个两个程度嘛。
那个单位性。对，
没错。但是还像我说的就是说，那样子做的话是所有的都得算的，叫 pairwise 的彼此合算。你可以用不同的 measure， 就 Jacob similarity measure 也是一种，那个 cosine similarity 也是一种，就是我现在只计算一种 measure 而已。cosine similarity 是可以的，就会用来算那个 similarity。
那怎么讲？就是说这个东西它就有点像，因为我之前上过那个相似就是某课，它是介绍一个就是那个 scapegram 的那个 word vector。
那 word vector 是吧？那
有点相似。
那是另外一个东西 ，word vector 也是最近2年才出来的技术。它那个是也是把那个东西变成一个 vector representation， 然后这么使用的东西在 vector 上进行操作。
对，他们哪个效果好一点？现在
你如果说是做东西的话，它 word vector 肯定是更，因为它是肯定是更好的效果。只不过说那个跟我们今天做的东西关系不是特别的大啊。对。今天主要的还是做那个 similar 的那个 double detection 的东西，然后还有包括就是说，为什么我们这个 Jacob similarity 是因为用 Jacob similarity 后边有一个 RSH 的那个哈希的方式可以用，因为那个哈希方式是取决于你用什么样的 similarity 的方式去算，所以前面先介绍的是 Jacob similarity， 然后后边才能介绍那个 RSH 的。
如果只是找相似的那个word vector 效果好一点，就更快。
我也不能说 word vector 效果更好，它其实还是把那个 double 变成 vector 的。但是你如果用那个来去算它的那个 similarity 的话，好像也不是用 vector 直接去算 similarity 的。他们对啊，他也不是那么做的。那个的话，复杂度肯定是更复杂一些。我们这边的话确实就是更快一些。
这个的 secondary thought 这卡子先往上找一个，比如说可以做，然后让我改。
也行，其实从网上找后来也都是可以接受，这个没什么问题。不过这个其实并不需要做 secondary thought。
你说一个是顺序，一个是……
我知道。但那个其实你就是先做一个 thought， 然后再一个 thought， 其实就可以了。你可以试一下，你可以试。
然后第二个，这里是我虽然是这里从那个 SSP 那边改过来的，但是反正不太明白。这里它那个算法就自动的帮你默认，第一个就是 ID， 然后第二个就是它那个
不是，这是一个函数的输入，这是函数，这个是一个函数，这个函数有3个 input。这个3个 input 是说，这个第一个输入是这个点，第二个输入这个点上的属性，第3个输入是新的属性，这个点接收到的新的 message， 是这样3个输入参数。然后里边的话是函数的 body， 就是说你针对这3个东西，你如何来处理，得到一个新的结果。然后这个函数的输出值是最后是一个新的属性，来留在这个点上。
那这个信息到底是从哪传过来的？
从其他的点传过来，这是一个不同的那个。
那它会默认就是你这函数里面就会是它传过来这个信息吗？
其实说你这儿还有一个默认信息，这一步是说把所有的信息默认起来了，然后这个是说
那我这一步可以放在后面再写一个吗？
你不需要再写，就是说你只要定好这3个函数就可以了。这个其实
顺序无所谓是吧？
这个 private operator 是只需要你提供它这3个函数给他，然后具体里面是怎么实现，是 private operator 去做，他来帮你就是说怎么去在这些点上收消息、合并消息、发出消息，是他来操作。
那我怎么写这3个函数顺序就是无所谓的？
顺序有所谓，它这必须是
这
个是对，还是当然是按它的顺序来，因为这个 private operator 是一个函数调用嘛，函数调用里边你给的是参数嘛，你是把这个参数传给这个 private operator， 所以你这个顺序变的话，就变成这个函数放这儿的话，那肯定是它
意义就
变了嘛，不一样。
好，然后还有这里就是它实际上就是把它那个组合直接就给它
就做了一个哈希，就是做了一个哈希，就这个意思，就做一个哈希。
Okay, so let's continue. Now we have, remember that what we have done so far, we have represent documents as sets of singles, and we already represent sets as Boolean vectors, matrix. And so the next step is to convert the columns to short signatures. And so that's the key step in the second technique in mean hashing. So now giving you the document, the matrix, a naive approach is to how to get signature for columns to get small summaries for columns. And then, but anyway, so if given the small signatures for the columns, if you still do the pairwise computation, the complexity is still very high. So how to avoid this is a job for locality obsessive hashing. So that's a third technique. So now we still focus on the second one, how to represent columns by short signatures. That's the current focus. And you want to guarantee that similarities of signatures can reflect the similarities of the original columns. That's a major objective. And how we can do this? So we can hash the columns, which is called the signatures, which means that given one column, we apply the hash functions to this column, and then we get some hash results, and the hashing results called the signatures for this column. And for each column C, we can hash this column to a small signature we call HC. And as a result, HC is very small, so we guarantee that no matter how large your original document is, your original columns is, we are always able to load this signature into memory for computation. And then the second point is that the similarity between the two signatures must reflect the similarity of the two original columns. And so the goal is that we need to find a hash function, H. So if the similarity of two columns is high, then with a high probability, so the two columns have the same hashing results. And if the similarity of two columns is low, which means they are not similar, then the two columns, the signatures of the two columns has very high probability to be not equal to each other. So that's the basic idea. So now we can hash the documents into the buckets, and we expect that the most pairs of the near duplicate documents will be hashed into the same bucket. So the documents within the same bucket treated as candidate pairs. So we only need to compute similarities for these candidate pairs instead of the all pair similarity computation. So that's a basic idea. And so how we can find the hash function, and this is called mean hashing technique. That's what we will learn in this second technique. So remember the goal. The goal is that if the two columns, if their probability is very high, means they are similar to each other, then the probability that they're hatched to the same value is very high. And if the two columns are not similar to each other, then they should have high probability that their hash values are different. So that's a basic goal. And clearly that the hash function depends on the similarity metric, right? So that's why we first introduced the Jacob similarity, because for different similarity metrics, we need to have different hash functions in the second step. And not all the similarity metrics can obtain a suitable hash function. So that's one of the biggest challenge in the mean hashing technique, because for some similarity metrics, if you do not use Jacob similarity in this problem, it's possible that you are not able to find a suitable hash function to achieve this goal. And for Jacob similarity, we use mean hashing. And there are also some other Jacob similarity measures, such as Euclidean distance or cosine similarity. And for these measures, we have different hashing techniques. So for Jacob similarity, we use a mean hashing technique. So the idea of mean hashing is that imagine that we have the rows. Imagine the rows of the Boolean matrix permutate under a random permutation pi. So we call this a permutation is that we reorder the rows in the matrix. That's called a permutation. And we define hash function h pi c is the index. Okay, so this sentence is a little bit complicated, so I try to explain this for some time. So the idea of the mean hashing is that we define a hash function h pi c. So this corresponds to a permutation. So permutation is a reorder of the rows. So this function is the index of the first row in which the column C has a value 1 according to this permutate order pi. Okay, so the formal definition is that h pi c is mean pi, so according to its order pi c. So where in this permutation, we first meet the value 1, and the index of this first one is a value for this hash function. And then we can use several independent hash functions, which means that several random permutations to create signature for a column. So now each column will have one value for each hash function. So one signature bit corresponds to one hash function. So if we have 100 hash functions, means we have 100 permutations, we will have 100 signature bits for each column. So that's why one column can be reduced to a fixed length signature. So we guarantee that this fixed length signature can be stored in memory for the later computations. Okay, so again, I think this is the part where you do not quite understand, right? So the index of the first row in which column C has value 1 in this pi permutation, this pi permutate order. So we can see some examples here. This is a mean hashing example. Okay, assume that this is the input matrix. Remember that the rows are the k shingles, the columns are the documents. And so this is the input matrix. And what we want to get signature matrix. Okay, so each column will correspond to one signature bit for one hash function. So this is one hash function. So this is one permutation order. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 for these rows. So actually, it's just original order, right? So what is the signature value for the first column? So we just need to check from the first to the last and check where the first value 1 appears in this column, okay? So from the beginning to the end, so the first one is here, and index is 3, Okay, sorry. So we need to move from row by row. This is a better explanation. Okay. So for each column, we need to find the first one, right? We need to get the index of the first one, right? So we can start from the first row for all the columns. So in the first row, we meet 2 ones. In the first row, we meet 2 ones, and we see it's for the second column and for the third column. And index is 1. So that's why we have 2 ones for the second column and for the third column, which means the signature result, the hashing results for the second column is 1. Because the index of the first one, according to this order, is 1. And for the second column, for the third column, also the result is the same, because the index of the first one in this order is 1. So 1, 1. And then we move to the next row. And this column has already been computed, so we just discard it. And for the fourth column, or the fourth document, we meet the first one, right? There's a first one value in this column. And we get its index in this permutation order, which is 2. Now we move to the next. So these 3 columns already get signature values. So for the next, now we first get a 1 in this column. So the result is 1. So that's for this permutation. It's easy to understand, right? Now let's look at another permutation. This permutation is a reverse order. And how we can get the signature for this hash function of these columns. Okay. How we can get this? So again, we need to check the value, the first values for all the columns. So we get, this is the first, right? And then this is 1. And index is 1 here. So remember that this is a new permutation order. So we still check the rows from the first row to the last row. But we need to do this according to the current permutation order. So this is the first row now. So we start from here. This is the first row, and only the third column has a value 1. So the signature for the third column is 1, right? And then we move to the second row. So here, this one, we get 2 value 1s. And this for the first column, this for the second column. So we see the index of the first one in the 2 columns are 2. So 2 to here. And this one, so it's obvious, right? So it's here. It's 3. This is the first one according to this permutation. So we get another signature for the 4 columns. It's 2, 2, 1, 3. And now look at this third permutation. So it's your job to think about the signatures. So what is the result? You can try to follow the previous 2 examples. So which row you are going to check first according to this permutation? Here, right? So this is the first one. So we meet 1 for the first column. So what is the index? Yeah, it's 1. Remember, it's 1 because it's a current permutation, not the original permutation. So the index is 1. So it's 1 for the first column. It's 1. And we move to the second row. The second row for the current permutation. It's here, right? It's a 1. And the index is 2, right? So it's for the fourth column. It's 2. And we check the third row here. And the column 3 has a value, which is 3 here. And the fourth row, nothing, because 0, 0, 1 for the third column, we already get the result. And move to the fifth row. Okay, we get the first value for the second column, which is 5, right? So this signature matrix, how we obtain the signature matrix according to the permutation. So now let's go back to the previous slides. Let's look at the sentence again. So what does the sentence say? The index of the first row in which column C has a value 1 of the current permuted order. So H pi C. So the column C, according to the current permutation pi, and the hashing results is the index of the first value 1 in the, according to the current permutation for column C. Okay, so that's an example of explaining the result. Okay, so now look at a new example. So you can try to compute the results by yourself. And okay, so this a new matrix and some permutation orders. Okay, so let's follow the previous example, previous algorithm to check what is signatures for this permutation. Okay, we try to do this for, okay, you can do this step by step. Now giving you this permutation, I'll give you one maybe 10 seconds to get the result. What is a signature for the 4 columns given this permutation? So what is the result? Yeah, 2, 1, 2, 1, right? So 1, 1, 2, 2, so 2, 1, 2, 1. And now the second permutation, oh, sorry. Okay. I made some mistake here. Anyway, so given this permutation, well, you should be able to find the signatures now, right? So just find first here, so it's 1, 1, and the second row, and 2, and for the third column, nothing, and the third row, third column, nothing, and fourth row, okay, we get the value 1, so it's 1 here, right? So similarly for this permutation, and we can get the result like this. So that's the idea of getting the signatures for the columns, given the hashing techniques. So remember that for the Jacob similarity, we use a hashing technique, but it does not mean that if you use another similarity measure, you can still use the hashing technique, right? So remember this. The idea is that we, from this original large sparse matrix, we transform it to small and compact matrix. In the original matrix, many entries are of value 0, right? But in the new signature matrix, all entries will have some value because that index of the first ones in the a certain permutation order. And according to some theoretical analysis, we can guarantee that the similarity of 2 signature columns is quite similar to the signature of the original 2 columns in the matrix. And so that's called the mi-hashing property. And also that is why, given the Jacob similarity, we can use this mi-hashing technique to guarantee the similarities, to guarantee preserving the similarities. Okay. And so this is just a very brief explanation. For more detailed explanation, you can refer to the textbook. So in the textbook, there are some more formal proofs about why, given Jacob similarity, you can use mi-hashing to do this signature matrix computation. The idea is that, so remember what is the goal? The goal is that if 2 columns, they have very high similarity, then the probability that they are hashed to the same value should be very high. And if 2 columns are not similar, their similarity is very low, then the probability that they have the same hashing value should be also be very high. So that's the objective goal. And in the mi-hashing technique, the property is that the probability of the hashing value of column C1 and column C2 under the permutation pi is exactly the similarity of C1 and C2. So here it is a probability. So that's why if the 2 columns have very high similarities, then the 2 hashing results of the 2 columns have very large probability because it just exactly the similarity itself. The similarity itself is a probability, right? So high similarity means high probability. And if there's a low similarity, and then the probability of being the same is also very low, which means that the probability that the 2 columns have different hashing values is very, very high. And the reason is that, okay, here it's just a very brief explanation. So we can assume that the X be a document and Y is a shingle, okay. So then the probability that Y is the first one in the permutation pi is 1 over x, right? Because there are assume that there are x k shingles. So the probability that it is a first is just 1 divided by x, right? And so it is equally like that. Sorry. Okay, oh, it feels better. Okay, so this is a probability that this shingle y is the first one. Okay, so it's a 1 over x. And it's equally like that for any y in x is mapped to the first element, right? So now let y be the first of both C1 and C2. Okay, so if pi y is mean C1 union C2. Sorry, not both. It's the union of C1. It's either C1 or C2. So if y is in this case, so it means that in the permutation pi, y is either the first value of C1 or y is the first value of C2, right? So one of the two columns have to have 1 at position y. So that's in this case. So the probability that both are true is a probability that y is in both C1 and C2, which means that, okay, for the first one of C1 in permutation pi and the first one of C2 in permutation pi, they have the same result. They have the same position. Should be the number of the common ones. Okay, so that's the number of common ones divided by all the ones in both C1 and C2. Okay, so that's here. I'll try to repeat this again. So why the probability is like this? This probability means that the position of the first one in C1 and the position of the first one in C2, they are the same, right? If they are the same, means that both two columns have a 1 at this position, right? So both columns should have a 1, which means that this position must have a 1 in both columns, right? So only this number of the columns can be in this case. Only the number of intersection of the two columns have both 1s, right? So only these rows could be this case. And how many rows there are? So there's a union. There's this number of lines, the union of the two columns, this number of lines. And so the probability is that just do division. So this is exactly the similarity of the two columns. So which is the Jacob similarity, you see. So according to, so let's look at the connections between the me-hashing technique and the Jacob similarity. Because you do the me-hashing according to this step, based on the permutation and find the first index of find the index of the first one. So that's your me-hashing technique, right? So because of following this step, and we have such a probability. So this is the probability. And this probability is exactly the Jacob similarity. So as a result, for the given Jacob similarity measure, we can use this hashing technique to do the signature computation, because this can preserve the similarity in the signature matrix. Because if two columns, they have very high similarity, then the probability that the two columns are hashed to the same value has very high probability, right? So we call this similarity preservation. Anyway, so this is just a very brief proof. So you can see the textbook for another explanation. So that's that can help you to better understand the me-hashing property and the connections between the me-hashing steps and the Jacob similarity. So the major idea is that according to this me-hashing technique, according to the me-hashing steps, then we can guarantee a probability that if two columns they have hashed to the same value, then their similarity is very high. And exactly is that the similarity of the two columns is just the probability that two columns have the same hashing value. So that's the result. Okay.
So how many permutations you need to choose? There are n factorial combinations.
So that's a number of hash functions you need to use, right?
Yeah, so how many?
That will be introduced in the next step, actually. So we use this in RSH. So in RSH, we need to select a good number for the number of hash functions. And also, we also have some other parameters we need to choose in order to get good results. Okay. So this is still for the proof in the previous slide. So it's just there are 4 types of rows. So both ones, both zeros, and then 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1. So according to this analysis, so we can prove that the probability that 2 columns have the same hash value is exactly the similarity, Jekyll similarity of the 2 columns. Okay, so still about the proof of the previous slide. Okay, so let's look at the result. This is a matrix, so this is a signature matrix. And for the similarities, we can see for the similarity of column 1 and 3, and for the column similarity is 0.75 here, 1 and 3, because it's a union section, right? And for the signature matrix here is we have only 3 permutations, so there are only 3 rows, and the result is we check 2, 2, 1 and 2, 4, 1. So this on this row they have different values. So the signature similarity is 2 divided by 3 is 0.67, right? So that's for this pair. For pair 2 and 4, so in this matrix, the value is 0.75, and in this signature matrix, it's 1. And for 1, 2, 3, 4, so both are zeros. So we can see that the similarities computed based on the original matrix, the column similarity, is very similar to the signature matrix, right? This is just a very, very small example. So the gap is still a little bit large. But if you think that there are many documents, and so also for signature matrix, assume we have 100 hash functions, which means we will have 100 rows. So then the difference between the similarities between the column similarities and the signature similarities will be very small. So that's a basic idea. So now we can use a much smaller signature matrix to do the similarity computation instead of the original set similarity as a column and similarity to find similar pairs. So that's a Min-hashing technique. And so we know the probability now. So now we can generalize to multiple hash functions. And so the similarity of 2 signatures is just a fraction of the hash functions in which they agree, right? So this slide shows that, for example, here this column and this column, so only 2 rows they agree to the same value. So the similarity of 2 signatures is just a fraction of the hash functions. So in which they agree to each other. And because of the Min-hashing property, so the similarity of the columns is the same as the expected similarity, which means the probability, the expected similarity of their signatures. Okay. So this is the idea of the Min-hashing technique. But how to do the Min-hashing signature computation? It is more complicated. So remember how we did previously. We check the permutations, right? And then we go to the corresponding rows according to the permutation. And then we check if there are some ones. Then we update the signature matrix. So that's what we do. But this is not realistic for a given large matrix. And so assume that we have 100 random permutations of the rows, and we think of the signature of the columns as also as a column vector. And in this column vector, so each entry corresponds to the ith permutation of the ith hash function, which is an index of the first row that has a value 1 in column C for that permutation. So which means that signature Ci is min pi I C. So this is still not easy to understand, but you just need to remember the meaning of Ci. So 6C is a vector, is a index, is a signature vector. So here, so 2 to 1 is a signature vector for the first column. And 6C is a vector, and I is a ith element in this vector, or as entry in that vector. So it corresponds to the ith permutation of the ith hash function result. So signature Ci is just correspond to the ith permutation, and in that permutation, what is the index of the first row that has a value 1? And so now this signature matrix is much smaller, right? We achieve that we compress the long bit vectors, the original column matrix, into the short signatures. So that's the idea. But how we can do the implementation? We cannot do the real permutations, right? We cannot real do the permuting. We cannot real do permuting rows for a large matrix that has very high complexity, right? And so what we do instead is called row hashing. So the idea is that we assume that we have 100 hash functions, okay, ki, and the ordering and the ki gives a random row permutation. So that's called row hashing. We just hash each row to a different number, and then as a result, so as the original order of these rows, by this hash function will be changed to a new row permutation, a new order for original orders. Okay, so that's the idea. We do this. We define this hash function as as kind of a new mapping the original row index to a new order, and this then we still scan the original matrix from the beginning to the end, from the first row to the last row to find the signature results. And so the implementing details is like this. So you can still remember the previous example when you try to get signatures in the matrix, right? And in the example, what you do is you first go to the first row for the current permutation, right? So that's what you did in the example. But think about if there are too many a large matrix, and what you can do, you are not able to do the real permutation, right? So what you need to do is like what is said here. You define a permutation hash function, and this hash function gives you a row permutation. And next, you still scan the matrix from the first row to the last row. And for each column C and hash function K, so the Ki represents a hash function, and Ki keeps a slot for the hashing value. So this is the result of the hashing Ki for the column C. And so what we want to get is for each column C, we want to get a vector, right? So for each vector, in the vector, each entry corresponds to one hash function. So initially, we will set all 60i to infinity, and then we gradually to get the index of the first rows for each hash function into this matrix. Then we scan the rows looking for the value of ones, and for each column. So suppose that the row J, in row J, we are counting at row J, has a value 1 in column C. So what we do, we need to check for each Ki, for each permutation. We will check what is the mapping of this row J in that hash function, right? And so each hash function Ki will map row J to a new number. So that's according to its own permutation. And in that new number, so that is a row index for this value 1, right? So what we need to check, we need to check if this index of the row for row J in the new mapping is the smallest one. If it is the smallest one, then it is a signature for this column, right? So that's what we need to check. We need to check if it is the smallest one. And this 6CI is used to store the current smallest index for value 1 for each, for the permutation Ki. So Kij is a mapping of the row J in this permutation. And this is used to store the current smallest index according to this permutation Ki for the first one. And we compare this index and this value. So if this is smaller, we do the update, and otherwise we just move to the next row for column C. So I'm not sure if you are already clear about the algorithm. So anyway, so we can move to example. The example is more clear and can help you to understand the details. So remember why we need to do this is because what do we want to get? We want to get for each permutation, we want to get the index of the first one in that permutation, right? So that's what we want. We want to get index of the first row in that permutation. And so given the example, okay, it's okay for you to go to the first row, then second row, the third row, the fourth row, and to check the ones, right? So that's what you do in the example. But in the real case, you cannot do this in the random order. And what you do is you use a hash function to define the permutation mapping. So you map the original rows to a new orders. And now you scan the matrix from the first row to the last row. And for a given row, so here, for given row J, what you need to check is to check for all the permutations, what is the new index for this row J in that new permutation. And then after you get the index, because this is a value 1, right? So you get index for this value 1, you need to check if this index is the smallest for that permutation, right? So that's what we want to check. If it is, then we need to we can get the signature, right? So here this step is used to find the smallest index for the value 1 for each permutation. And so anyway, I know it's still not very easy to understand, so let's move to a real example. This should be much easier to understand. So assume that we have 5 rows or 5 k shingles. Okay, so still it's k shingles. And we have 4 documents. And we have 2 hash functions. So these 2 hash functions will do the permutation. The permutation actually maps the original row orders to a new order, right? You can see, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 is original order. And according to its x1 mod 5, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 0. This from this order to this order, this is one permutation. And the 3x plus 1 mod 5, so this from this order to a new order. So we have 2 hash functions. Okay. So what we want to get? We want to get a 2 times 4 matrix, so which is a signature matrix. For each column, we have 2 bits for the signature, right? So 1 bit for the first hash function and 1 bit for the second hash function. So now let's look at, according to the algorithm, how we can get the result. So initially, in this matrix, 2 times 4 matrix, all the entries are infinity because now we have no signature for each column. So now we move to, we scan the rows 1 by 1 in the matrix. Now we start from the first row. In the first row, we have 2 ones, one for column 1, one for column 4, right? So which means that we may update the existing index for the first ones in column 1 and column 4. So how we can do that? And in row 0, so H1, 0 and H2, 0 here. So which means that the 1 in this permutation is in the row 1, right? And this 1 in this permutation is also in row 1. Okay. So previously the result is infinity. So 1 is definitely smaller than infinity. So we update the values 1 and 1 for both column S1 and S4 in both hash functions. So this, what does this entry store? It stores the current smallest index for the value 1 in the first column, according to what we have seen so far. Okay, we only see one row, and based on this one row information, we know that there is a 1 in column 1 in row 1, or for this permutation, and there is a 1 in column 1 for this permutation, right? So there's 2 1s, and for this one the same. For column 4, we have a value 1 in row 1 for this permutation, and we have a value 1 in row 1 for this permutation. So the 2 hash values are 1 here. Okay, so now let's move to the next row. Next row has only one value, 1 for the third column, right? So for the third column, let's look at what is index for this one in the 2 permutations. In this permutation, the index is 2, which means that this value is in row 2 in this permutation, right? And in here, in this, it's in row 4 for this permutation. So now let's look at the current result. For S3 is infinity. 2 and 4 are much better. So we update 2 and 4 here, so in this matrix, which means that we have checked 2 rows now, right? So for these 2 rows, and we know that currently we guarantee, according to what we have seen so far, the first index of value 1 is in this permutation for column 3 is 2, and in this permutation for column 3 is 4. So this is what we have seen right now. Okay, so that's for this column. And now let's move to this column. And we have seen 2 1s. This for column 2 and this for column 4, right? So that we need to check their corresponding index in both permutations. And for column 2, the corresponding index is 3 and 2 for this permutation and for this permutation. So previously it is infinity, so we have 3 and 2 here. So now we have some update for column 2. And this is for column 4. And column 4 for these 2 permutations has index is 3 and 2. So 3 and 2 comparing to the existing result, 3 is larger than 1. So which means that we already have a 1 in row 1, right? So now we have another 1 in row 3. But the row 3 is definitely below row 1. So row 1 is still the best. So we don't need to update, right? And for here, row 2 also again, so 1 is in row 2. So but we already seen a 1 in row 1, right? So row 2 is still below row 1. So it's not row 1 is still the best. So we do not update as 4. Okay. So that's for this step. Now we move to this row. So we have 3 1s. So we just do this in the similar step. For each column with value 1s, 1, 3, 4, we check their indexes, 4 and 0. So okay, so for the first permutation, these lines have index 4, which is worse than existing results. So we just discard this 4. But 0 is already the smallest, right? So 0 for column 1, 3, 4 in the second permutation, which means that we know that in this permutation, actually in row 0, the first row in this permutation has a value 1 for the 3 columns, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we will update their corresponding index. So this is 0, 0, 0. Because in this permutation corresponding to H2, we know that there is a 1 in row 0 for S1, S3, and S4. Okay, so that's for this row. And next, the last row, we have value 1. So similarly, for the second permutation, the index number is 3, which is worse than the existing values. And for the first index, it's 0. And what we've seen before, previously is 2, right? Previously, we see a value 1 in row 2, but now we see a 1 in row 0. So 0 is definitely better than row 2, so we update 0 in this matrix. Now, all the rows are scanned, so we finish, and then we obtain the signature matrix like this. And next, you can use this matrix to do the similarity computation. Right? So that's algorithm details. And I'm not sure if you have followed my steps to understand this example. So if so, now it's your job to do this computation. Okay, so this just show you that based on this signature matrix, the similarities are very similar to what you have, what you can compute in the original matrix. Okay, so this signature matrix is 0, as same, but inject similarity is close to 1. So, which means that in the signature matrix, the similarity is preserved. Okay, so this is your task to compute the signature matrix for this column, for these 2 columns, given this given the result and the 2 hash functions. Okay, so we can also have a break, and then we can see the results later. You try to do this job during the break.
With the project, is it okay that if we already tested in the local system, or do we have to test it in Spark cluster?
What do you mean by a Spark cluster?
When we pass the SPT.
Oh, yeah. It's better to use SVT to compile it and write in terminal.
Okay.
Because otherwise, maybe Eclipse may have some problems. Eclipse is not a real running environment.
Yeah. Okay. And with this one, how do you determine the number of permutations?
Number of hash functions, right?
Yeah.
So actually, already asked. Yeah.
Okay.
So we will introduce this in the third step in RSH.
Okay, so when we implement this, it's not really in order. Like we have to determine the number of permutations first.
Yeah, we need to decide how many hash functions we will use, and then we need to design these hash functions. Like this, we have 2 hash functions here, right?
Yeah.
But we need to do the decision by ourselves. We need to first design these hash functions, and then we can, according to these hash functions, we can obtain a signature matrix for the document, and then do the symmetric computation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
S1 S3 right？哎，我好像错了。对，这应该不算，这只有2行不同的算这儿了。哦，这应该算错，这应该算错。对，应该是我看看啊，这是应该是。哦，不，32应该是 original， 哦，没，这是1了，这是一样的，对吧？啊，然后32的话是 S1 and S4， 对吧？是4个吗？等等，1、2、3个 common 对吧？2。S1 S4 S1也是0只算1的。那这这样就这样。对啊，这是2嘛，然后 union 的话是3嘛，3是3行有1嘛。是他们2个的 intersection 2，对吧？他们有2行。只看有1的。对，只看有1的。然后这个是1.0是这个 matrix， 这个 matrix 是101.0，他们俩是关系一样的，所以形面这就是1样。哦，那不一样。不一样的话，看如果这比如说是2，对吧？那就是1/2了，因为它有一个0是一样的。如果完全不一样，那就是 0， 没有一样的。啊，这个意思。对，他刚才在前面一个 slide 有说，就是在 signature matrix 上。The similarity is the fraction of the number of the fraction of the hash functions agree to the same value， 就是看多少个 hash function， 它们的 result 是一样的。0也算，这是 index， 这里的0不算，是因为这个0是代表是说这个东西存在还是不存在。这里边0它意义是说这是第0行，这个2个不同概念。
就 TSS 可以。
对你打一个，对，打这个。
然后那个 project two 的正常思路应该是怎么做
project two 还是
？two
你是 problem two 还是说是第二个 project？
project two
就是那个 shopping pass 那个。
对。
那个就是说是你原来考虑的不是往出发结果对吧？你在 map 里面是说我收到遇到一个我向我说的 upstream neighbor 去发东西对吧？现在就是反过来了，现在是往向所有的那个 incoming 那边发东西。
可是我怎么知道我的 income 的那个呢？
我想想啊，你是把那个图反过来了，对，然后再做的对吧？
对，因为当时时间来不及了，就直接反了。
这也对，反正这肯定是没问题。对啊，那个是。你现在其实还是拿的是一个 emergent list 对吧？
对。
拿有的可能是说，我这个点，像我说 upper neighbor 发一个对吧？现在的话是说我里边的每个点来向这个点去发东西。就说你现在的话就是说，那个怎么说？
This is for H distribution, but C2 still have you don't need to care about C1 because here is C2.
对呀，我和这儿反正有点懵住了，是。我们那个给的图不是那个 rotate index，
对，不是是那个
一个 pair
对。
哦。对的，其实跟你把图反过来也差不了多少。对，差不多意思。我当时我的意思就是说是这样的话，就是相当于是建了一个就反方向的一个传播的方向，但是这样的话跟你把图反过来也没什么差别。对，也没什么差别。对，现在仔细想的话，其实也没什么差别。
Okay, so let's continue. Let's finish the last topic. So first, let's look at this practice. I'm not sure if you have already got the result. So have you got the result for this? Okay, so let's see if your result is correct. So following the previous example, you should be able to get the result because it's not very difficult. And so this originally they are all set to infinity, right? So next we will look at the first row. And the first row only C1 has value 1, but then we need to get index for the two hash functions. It's 1 and this is 3, right? So we have 1, 3 for the first column corresponding to the two signature. And the second row, this one, only for the second signature, right? So it is 1 and 3 as well. It's 2 and 0. So we have 2, 0, right? So this is not changed. And we have 3s in both lines. And this 3 here for this first index is 3, and for the second index is 2. And 3 and 2, so there's 2 is better than 3, so we have a bit here. And now this row is line 4 for column C1, and the two indexes are 1 and 4 and 4, worse than the existing values, so no update. And now we move to the last row. Last row is 1, so it's 0 and 1, right? 0 is better than 2, is smaller than 2, so we have 0, and 1 is larger than 0, so nothing updated here. So the result is 1020, right? So if your result is correct, should be correct. we will have the exam question is something like this. So it's very important to know how to compute the signature matrix by applying the hash functions. Okay. Now we move to the last step. It's called locative sensitive hashing. So remember what we have done in the first two steps. So here in the k-scheduling, we represent documents as sets. And so now we are able to use to apply some similarity measures to evaluate the similarity between two documents. So that's for the first step. And now the second step is to get the short signatures for the long set representation of documents, because it's possible that the set may be very huge, and maybe it's not possible to store it in a limited memory. So given the some numbers of hash values, so we are able to guarantee that each vector of a document can be stored in memory. So, but the most important feature is that here, although we reduce the matrix size, but we can still preserve the probability. So that's a connection between the relationships between the Jacob similarity and the me-hashing technique. So the me-hashing technique, according to these steps, we can guarantee that the probability of two columns will have the very high probability to have the same hash value if they have very high similarity values. So that's second step, me-hashing. But we haven't solved the most important problems, how to avoid the pairwise similarity computation. So that's last step, the locality sensitive hashing, which has widely used in high dimensional data for nearest neighbor search and some other technique problems. It focuses on the pairs of signatures, and these signatures are likely to be from similar documents. So as a result, we can only check these documents and then avoid the other pairs. Thus, the number of comparisons is reduced significantly. So what is RSH? The locality sensitive hashing. And so according to name, it means that if two close, so they have a very high probability to be hashed to the same bucket. So that's a major idea. And the goal is to find documents with Jacob similarity at least S. So for RSH, we need to have a threshold. For this problem, we have a threshold S, right? So this is original problem. And we want to find all the pairs with Jacob similarity at least S. And so in RSH, general idea is that we use a function fxy that tells whether x and y is a candidate pair. Which means that we can check according to fxy if this pair whose similarity is larger than this threshold. And if so, if it is a candidate pair, then we must evaluate their similarity to do a further computation to check their results. And this is applied to the me-hashing matrices, signature matrix. And we need to hash the columns of signature matrix to many buckets. So we do this based on the signature matrix. And each pair of documents that hashes into the same bucket is a candidate pair. So that's just a basic idea. Okay. So the pair of documents that are hashed into the same bucket from this matrix is treated like as a candidate pair, which means that we need to do a further computation or not, because they are treated as candidate pair. We can also just use them as similar pairs for some problems. So there's some thorough analysis for this RSH technique, and I also try to explain the theories behind. But anyway, still a little bit not that straightforward, not that easy to understand. So assume that we have a similarity threshold S, okay? And column X and Y of the matrix from this signature matrix are a candidate pair if their signatures agree on at least fraction S of their rows, right? So remember what is the similarity between two signatures in this signature matrix is a fraction of hash functions in the matrix that agrees to the same value. So given this threshold as if there are two columns are candidate pair, so it means that their signature, the similarity computed based on their signatures are at least S, which means that at least fraction S of their rows agrees to the same value. So which means MXI, MIX and MIY, I is the number of rows, X and Y are two columns for at least the fraction S values of I. And we expect that the documents X and Y to have the same Jacquard similarity as their signatures. So it is not exactly the same. So remember that it is a probability. So the probability, expected similarity of the signatures, or the probability of the two signatures is equal to each other is the Jacquard similarity of the original two documents. Okay, so it's not exactly the same, just expected similarity is same to the Jacquard similarity of the original documents. So for RSH, the best idea is that we will hash the columns of signature matrix several times, and we arrange that the similar columns are likely to hash to the same bucket with high probability. And the candidate pairs are just those that have been hashed to the same bucket. So within each bucket, these pairs are candidate pairs. So we can further compute their similarity to see if their similarity is real larger than the given threshold S. So that's a basic idea. It's hash columns of the signature matrix M several times to different buckets. Then we check if in these buckets so the two documents are similar or not. So the idea is here, so given the signature matrix, and we partition the whole matrix into B bands, and in each band there are R rows. Okay, so this is a whole signature matrix. We partition them into B band, and in each band there are R rows. So this is one signature, the signature of one column. So one signature, one column, the signature of one column is partitioned into B band. Okay, and so for each signature, it will be partitioned to B band. Okay, so we partition the matrix M into several bands. So we divide matrix M into B bands of R rows. So each band have R rows, and for each band, we hash is a portion of each column, only the portion in this band of each column to a hash table with K buckets. So we make K as large as possible. And the candidate column pairs are those that hash to the same bucket for larger than one band. So if in any band, the two pairs are hashed to the same, or the two documents are hashed to the same bucket, then we treat them as a candidate pair. So that's a basic idea. And we need to tune the value B and R to catch the most similar pairs, but few non-similar pairs. So we wish that given a proper value for B and R, and then the documents in the same buckets are real similar pairs, and the documents not in the same buckets are not similar to each other. That's what we expect. And we hope that using a proper value for B and a proper value for R, we can achieve this objective. And so, okay, so until now, what you need to know is that we will partition the matrix into several bands. And within each band, we will hash the portion of each column to a hash table with K buckets. And then we will check for these pairs if they are hashed to the same bucket. If they are hashed to the same bucket, then they will be treated as a candidate pair. So this is the whole idea, okay? And this is original signature matrix M. and it is divided into B bands. And in each band, there are rows. So for this band, we have several columns, and each column has some portion within this band, right? So this the portion of column 1, column 2, and all the columns. And for each portion in this band, we will hash them to some buckets. So this bucket is used to check if two documents is a candidate pair. So for example here, and this is column 2, and this is column 6. So column 2 and column 6 are hashed to the same bucket. So we assume that they are probably identical. They're probably similar to each other. So that is treated as a candidate pair. So that's the idea of how to get candidate pairs. So we will do this for each band. And for all the bands, for each band, we will do this hashing. And all the columns that have been hashed to the same bucket in a band will be treated as candidate pairs. And column 6 and 7, 6, 7, that hashed to different buckets. So we just believe that they are not similar according to this given similarity threshold. So what we expect is that for the documents hashed to the same buckets, they are similar to each other. But because for all the for what we have done so far, all the are based on some hashing techniques, right? So there must be some errors. So it is possible that some documents hashed to the same bucket, but they are not similar according to the similarity threshold. So we wish to reduce such cases. So we wish that the documents in the same buckets are all similar pairs. And also for documents hashed to different buckets, we expect that they should be different. They should not be similar according to the given threshold. But it's still possible that the similar documents that are hashed to different buckets. We also wish to reduce this case as much as possible as well. So that's two cases we want to minimize in this technique. Okay, so talking about the details of this RSH hashing technique, hashing bands, what we do is like this. We partition the matrix into B bands, and for each band, we check the corresponding portions of all the columns. And regardless, we don't care about what the columns look like in the other three bands. We don't care about if they are similar or not in the other band. We only care the portions of the columns in this band. And the two columns that do not agree in band 1 will have 3 other chances to become a candidate pair. Okay, so if they are not similar here, then we don't treat them as a candidate pair, but they still have some chances to be similar in the other 3 bands. So if they are real similar pairs, if they are not similar here, at least in one band, they should be similar to each other. So that's a basic idea. So if they are not identical in any of these bands, so they should not be similar. So that's what we expect. So in this example, so this is 0 to 1, this is 0 to 1. So these two columns will be treated as one candidate pair. So that's a result of the RSH. So partition the matrix into several bands, and each band has several rows. And for each band, we check all the columns and to get the candidate pairs. And when we compute the candidate pairs, we only focus on the current band. We don't care about the other bands. And there are some assumptions in this technique. So we assume that there are enough buckets that columns are likely to hash to the same bucket unless they are identical in a particular band. So we assume that the same bucket means identical in that band. And so that's as shown in this example. So if they are identical, means they are exactly the same. So they are treated as the same bucket. And assumptions needed only to for simplify the analysis, but not for correctness of the algorithm. So this can be used for the later theoretical analysis. And so just to try to emphasize the steps again in RSH, what you do. Okay, given you the signature matrix, what you do, you partition the matrix into B bands, into several bands. And into B bands, in each band, there are several rows, right? And in each band, if two columns in this band are identical, so we believe that they are in the same bucket and they are treated as a similar pair. And then we'll get all such pairs by checking all the bands for all the columns. So finally, the similar pairs will be obtained according to this algorithm. And so there are some examples. So assume that we have the following case. Assume we have 10,000 columns of M. So we have 10,000 documents. And we have a signature of 100 integers, so which means we have 100 hash functions. So as a result, the signature will take 40 megabytes. And we choose B to 20, so we have 20 bands. As a result, there are 100 rows, right? So the rows is, each band is 5. So there are 5 integers in each band. Now, assume that we want to find the pairs of documents that are at least of similarity value their similarity value is at least 0.8. So that's what we want to get. And so now check some theoretical analysis. So for pairs of similarity larger than this threshold, so we have B to 20 and R to 5. So we assume that the similarity of two columns is 0.8. So they should be detected, right? Because their similarity is larger and they equal to the threshold. So if algorithms are correct, so they should be detected. They should be treated as similar because they have 80% in common. And because their similarity is larger and equal to S, so we want to this pair to be a candidate pair. And we wish that they should be hashed to at least one common bucket in one band, in at least one band, right? So that's what we want to achieve. So so if these two columns in some band are hashed to one common bucket, then we know that they will be detected, right? So that's our idea. Now let's do some analysis. So what is the probability that C1 and C2 is identical in one particular band? Because their similarity is 0.8, right? So there are 5 bands. So the probability that they are identical in one band is 0.8 to the power of 5, which is of this value. And now we check the probability that they are not similar in all of the 20 bands. So this is just in one band. There are 5 rows, right? In 5 rows, so this value is a probability that for all the 5 rows, they are the same, just in one band. So this value. Now we have 20 bands. So let's look at if they are not similar in all of the 20 bands, is 1 minus this value. So this value is the probability that they are identical. So the probability that they are not identical in one band is 1 minus this value, right? And they are not identical in all the 20 bands. And this value is, then we get to the power of 20. It's a very small result, okay? So which means that given this similarity for 2 columns, the probability that they are not similar, they are not identical in all of the 20 bands of this value. You can see it's a very small value, right? So which means that if they are very similar, then the probability that they are not detected in this RSH algorithm is of this probability, which is a very small probability. So which means that most of the similar pairs will be detected, right? So there's some theoretical analysis. So which means that about roughly, according to this probability value, about 1 thousands of the 80% similar column pairs are false negatives, which means that they are similar, but we missed them. So they're called false negatives. But anyway, we would find over 99% pairs of the truly similar documents by applying this RSH algorithm, right? So remember that this is just for detecting the candidate pairs. We haven't do the similarity computation in this stage. We only do at this step. We only do the candidate pairs detection. We can further do a similar computation for all the candidate pairs, but right now we don't do that. So this value just tell you that how accurate this algorithm is for a given two columns with very high probabilities, and the probability of false negatives is very, very low. So if this probability is much larger, then this value is even smaller. So the more similar the two columns is, the less probable that they are not detected in RSH. So that's our idea. And so this is a case that they are similar. Now let's look at the case. Remember that we wish that we aim to find all the similar pairs. So it's one case. Another case is that if they are not similar, we also expect that they are not detected in RSH, right? So let's look at another probability. When they are not similar to each other. So assume that the similarity is 0.3. And since this is much smaller than this threshold, right? So we expect that this should not have a common bar case in any band. This should be different in all bands, right? That they cannot be detected as a candidate pair. So let's look at probability. So given this similarity, and then they are identical in one particular band is of this value. It's 0.3 to the power of 5, right? So it's much smaller. And now, so they are treated as a candidate pair. It must because they are identical in at least one of the 20 bands, right? So what is the probability? It is 1 minus this value is that they are not similar, right? So this then to the power of 20 is they are not identical in all the 20 bands. So that's this value. And 1 minus this value is they are identical in at least one band, right? So which is of 0.0474. It's roughly it's around 5%. So this called false positives. These pairs should not be detected, should not be treated as candidate pairs. But in RSH, they are treated as candidate pairs because they are hatched to the same bar case. They are identical in at least one band. And so in other words, it means that roughly about 5% pairs of documents with this low similarity are treated as candidate pairs. So we can see that this is also a very small portion, right? We also wish to reduce the number of such false positives in the RSH algorithm. And according to the analysis, we can see that it almost satisfies our requirements. It's just like what we expect, right? False positives and false negatives. So this is false negatives. So they are identical. They are similar. Their similarity is larger than the threshold, but they are not detected. So that's false negatives. And this is false positives. They are not similar, but we treat them as similar as candidate pairs. Okay. So here it's kind of involves a trade-off. So we have the number of mean hash functions, right? So someone just you ask how many hash functions we need. So here it's a number of rows m, and given this number of rows, we also need to decide the number of bands, how many bands we need. And so Okay, so after the band is decided, so we know that the number of rows per band is also decided. It's just the number of rows divided by the number of bands. So it is. So and these values can be used to balance the false positives and the false negatives. So we wish to get small false positives and false negatives, and this is a criterion that how we choose these values. So for example, if we have only 15 bands or 5 rows, and the number of false positives would go down, but the number of false negatives would go up. So just based on what we have analyzed before, there's the equation. So I will show the equation later. And so you just need to know that for different number of bands and rows, so the number of false positives and the number of false negatives, there is a trade-off. Okay. So sometimes this is larger, sometimes that is larger, and we need to have a good balance for the two types of false results. And so what we want, ideally, we wish that, so in x-axis is a similarity of two columns. In y-axis, it is a probability of they are identical in a bucket. Okay, so we wish that for all the columns, if their probability is larger than this threshold s, so here this s, the similarity value, then the probability that they are identical is of value 1, right? So it means that they will always be detected. And for the columns with smaller similarity, we expect that the probability that they are identical in at least one bucket is of 0, which means that they will always not be detected. That's what we wish to get, but that's not possible. That's not we can get. But we can try to make our approach close to this curve. And what one band and one row gives you is that it's like this. So actually it's just because of the Jacquard similarity and mean hashing probability. Given one band, it means that the probability of two columns being hashed to the same bucket is exactly the Jacquard similarity of the two columns, right? So that's what we have analyzed before. So that's this way, but definitely it's not good, right? So this is what we expect. So how to achieve a curve similar to this one? So that's based on the analysis here. It's about the bands and rows per band. So the probability that the mean hashing signature for the documents agree in any one particular row of the signature matrix, we assume that is T. And that is just the similarity of the two columns. Okay, because the two columns, the similarity represents what is the fraction of the two columns are unequal to each other. So if in this signature matrix, and if they agree to some number of rows, the portion is T, then it's actually just a similarity. So we pick any band with all rows. So the probability that all rows in this band are equal is of this probability T to the power of R, because T is for the probability that they agree to one row. Now they must be equal for 5 rows. So it's to R rows, it is a T to the power of R. And then the probability that some row in one band is not equal, it's not identical, it's 1 minus this value. Okay, so there are 2 probabilities. And so the probability that there's for the 2 columns, there's no band identical. In no band, they're identical. So it is computed like this. So T to power R is that they are identical in one band, right? So they are not identical in one band is 1 minus this value. So there's a probability that they are not identical in one band. They are not identical in all bands, then we get power of B for this value. So finally, the probability that the 2 columns there are at least one band identical is 1 minus this probability. So this is a final result. For 2 columns with similarity of t, then the probability, so this is a final conclusion. So the probability that they are identical in at least one band is of this probability. So this is the probability, right? Remember, this the probability is a y-axis, and similarity t is the x-axis. So finally, according to this function, we can draw a curve for this function, and the function is like this. It's roughly like this, and so as a result, how we can make this curve close to the expected one is to set s to roughly 1 over b to the power of 1 over r. So by setting the value of b and r to this number, and then so we can get a curve like this. So given this setting, and we can see that the curve, remember the expected curve is here is straight, and then here is straight, and then here is straight. But now we get some false positives and false negatives because of this function. This is what we have analyzed. So this is a function. This is a y-axis function, and the x-axis is t. And so in order to minimize both the false positives and the false negatives, we can set s to around to this value. Sorry, s is given. We can set b and r to roughly to approach s, and then we can get a good result. So given b is equal to 20 and r to 5, and the similarity threshold is s, so we can check what the probability that at least one band is identical. We can see that if they are not similar, which means their similarity is very small, they have low probability. The probability is also very, the probability that they are identical in one band is also very small, right? Especially we can see that when it is of similarity 0.2, the probability that they are identical is just about 0.006, very small. But when they are very similar to each other, and the probability that they are identical in one band is much high. It's very, very high. It's almost close to 1, which means that they will always be detected as candidate pairs. So this is a good property of RS function. By applying the RS technique, we can guarantee that if 2 columns, if they are not similar, then they are not similar, for example here, then the probability that they are treated as similar is very, very low. And if they are similar, their similarity is larger than the threshold, then their probability of being treated as candidate pairs is very, very high. They will always be detected in this RSH technique. So that's a conclusion. So how to pick R and B? So as I said before, so we try to get a given S is given, right? So we try to get the curve approach to this S value. So, and we try to minimize both the false positive rate, which is black error, and the false negative rate, which is the blue error. We try to, but there is a trade-off. So if we change R and B, then we are moving the curve actually. So sometimes this part is larger, sometimes this part is larger. So we need to have a good trade-off between the 2 parts. We try to make sure that both parts are small as possible, but there's still a trade-off. So it depends on the application. So in summary, we need to tune 3 parameters, M, B, and R, to get almost all pairs with similar signatures. So M is a number of hash functions. B is the number of bands. R is the number of rows in each band, right? So we want to get both small false positives and small false negatives. This is in RSH. So finally, after RSH, we can check in memory that if the candidate pairs, they really do have similar signatures. if their signatures have a similarity larger than threshold, so they are similar pairs. So that's a further check. Okay, but optional, we can also pass through the original data. So if they, according to the signature, they are similar, then we go back to the original data. We check if the original documents they are similar or not. So that's an optional step. So we can finally find all the. So this step is help us to remove the pairs that are not similar, right? And these are the false negatives that are not similar, but we detect them as similar as candidate pairs. But by applying a further checking, so we can remove these false negatives. Okay. In summary, so what we have learned today is that we have 3 steps for the similar pairs detection in a large data set. First is the shingling. We convert documents to sets. We use a hashing to assign shingle as an ID. Then we use a set of such IDs to represent documents. The next step is called min-hashing. The min-hashing is used to convert the large sets to short signatures, while we can still preserve similarity. So remember that there's a probability of the 2 hash values and the similarity of the 2 columns, their relationship between them. So we use, which is exactly here. So the probability that they are hashed to the same value is exactly the same as their similarity, Jekyll similarity. Remember, Jekyll similarity. So the similarity measure determines the hashing technique you use. So only Jekyll similarity you can apply the min-hashing, but if you use a different similarity measure, you need to use another hashing technique. So the last step is called locality-sensitive hashing. And we focus on pairs of signatures likely to be from similar documents. So this candidate pairs, and we use this technique to find outcandidate pairs of similarity larger than the given threshold. Okay, so that's all the summary of today's lecture. So next is about some other distance measures. So as said before, the hashing techniques correspond to the measures you use, distance measure or similarity measure you use. A generalized RSH is based on some kind of a distance between the points. And so the similar points are close to each other. So the similar points have smaller distance. So Jekyll similarity is not distance, it's a similarity. And one measure Jekyll similarity is called the Jekyll distance, it's a distance. So we in the generalized RSH, we call D is a distance measure. It must satisfy the following conditions. First, any distance between 2 pairs must be non-negative, must be larger than or equal to 0. And if the distance between the object and itself is always 0, and dxy is equal to dyx, so it's, there's no directions for distance. And this must, the triangle inequality must be satisfied. So distance from x to y is smaller than from x to z and to z to y. So if the measure satisfies these conditions, then we call this a distance measure. Okay. And we have some Euclidean distances, such as the L2 norm distance, which is the square root of the sum of the squares of the differences between x and y in each dimension. Right? It's one of the most common notion of distance, which is also called Euclidean distance. So, for example, from A to B, the Euclidean distance is 5. And L1 norm is the sum of the differences in each dimension, which is also called the Manhattan distance. So it's a distance you had to travel along the coordinates only. For example, from A to B, the L1 norm, the Manhattan distance are 4 plus 3. There are also L infinity norm, which is a maximum gap on all dimensions. For example, from A to B, the effective norm distance is 4. And for the non-Euclidean distance, Jekyll distance is 1, and also there's one called cosine distance, and it's based on the cosine similarity. and we have learned cosine similarity when we learn MapReduce, right? So it's just cosine distance is just relevant to that cosine similarity. Another one is called edit distance for strings with a number of inserts and deletes to change one string to another. So these are some other non-Euclidean distances. And for all these distances, we can have some hashing techniques to do RSH. So remember that RSH and the mean hashing technique, they are separate, different concepts. So RSH is just a technique for how to treat the metric, signature matrix. And for the hashing technique, it's about how you can obtain the signature matrix. Okay. So cosine distance is about the angle of the two vectors in the vector space. It's a dot product of two vectors divided by the distance product of the two vectors, the two vectors lengths. And okay, I don't want to show the details. And this is the edit distance. And edit distance is about the number of operations you need to perform to change a string to another string. And equivalent definition of the edit distance is x, the length of x plus the length of y minus 2 times of the longest common subsequence of the two strings. The LCS, the longest common subsequence, is just any longest string obtained both by deleting from x and deleting from y. So for example, we have x is a, b, c, d, e, y is a, b, c, d, u, v, e. If we want to turn x into y, we just need to first delete a and we get b, c, d, right? Then we insert u and v and between d and e, right? So there are 3 operations. So delete one a and insert 2 new characters. And so the edit distance is 3. And you can also compute this edit distance by applying this equation, so which is a longest common subsequence. The longest common subsequence of the two strings x and y is b, c, d, e. It's b, c, d, e, right? So it's 4. So the result is 5 plus 6 minus 2 times 4, which is 3 as well, which is edit distance for the two strings. And I introduced these distances just because all these distance measures have corresponding hash functions, corresponding hash techniques to do the locality sensitive hashing to get the to compute the similar pairs. And so there's hash functions to decide the equality. So about what a hash function is in the context of the RS families. And a hash function h takes 2 elements x and y and returns a decision whether x and y are candidate for comparison. So that's a general definition for such hash functions for RSH families. And the family of hashing functions computes mean hash values and says yes if they are the same. So that's about the mean hashing functions. So given 2 vectors in the mean hashing function, and they will check if they have they will compute the mean hashing values and then check if they are similar or not. And for short, so hx is equal to hy means that h says yes for both pairs of elements x and y. And so finally, we can have a generalized definition for RSH families, which is called D1, D2, P1, P2 sensitive. Family H of hash functions is set to this sensitive if for any x and y in S, and if the distance between them is smaller than D1, then the probability of all functions in H such that they agree to the same value is at least P1, which means that if 2 points are close to each other, the distance is very small, or they are similar to each other, then their probability that in the hashing space, they will be hashed to the same value with a certain probability, with a certain large probability, larger than P1. And also, if their distance is larger than D2, which means they are very far away, then their probability for all the hash functions in H if the probability that they agree to each other is at most P2, which means they are small, they should be small as possible. They cannot exceed this P2. P2 is a small value. So this is called D1, D2, P1, P2 associative hash function, which means that they try to hash the similar objects into the same values, and the objects that are far away from each other, that are not similar to each other, then the probability that they have the same hash value should be very small. So that's a general idea of the RSH families. So using a figure to illustrate, it's like this. So if two pairs have distance with smaller than D1, then their probability should be larger than P1. And if their distance is larger than D2, and their probability should be smaller than P1. And in between is not for sure part. So that's a whole a figure to illustrate RSH families. And so because of time, this is almost the last class. Okay, I'll try to use this to explain about this RSH family. So, so for example, we take the min-hashing Jacobi similarity as an example. So min-hashing gives us a D1, D2, 1 minus D1 minus D2 sensitive family, because the probability that they're equal to, their hashed value are equal to each other is exactly the same of their similarity, which is 1 minus D1. So that's why we call the min-hashing Jacobi similarity as a SH family. It is in our family because it satisfies this the definition. Okay, so I'll just finish. You can go to read this chapter, Mining of Massive Data Sets. It's about how to detect similar items in large data sets. And there are more details if you are not clear about some topics, some points in today's slides. Okay.